Welcome to the Transection podcast, where we discuss trans and non-binary life to help bridge the gap of understanding between people in our community and those outside of it, and to understand and support us better. With so much unnecessary debate in the media, we want to bring a real and raw experience to a wide audience to bring connection and authenticity to the subject with humor and a first-hand experience.
If you want to share with us what anything interesting you've got in the post during lockdown, you can tweet us at TransectionP. You can also find us at Transection Podcast on Instagram and under the Transection Podcast on Facebook. So, Jordan, shall we get ready for this week's episode of Euphoria and Dysphoria? What that's all about.
I'm really excited about this one. It's a comment we get a lot, at least for me, something that I run into frequently is, what is dysphoria like? And it's kind of really complicated, but not complicated in a sense. It's, if you've ever looked in the mirror and looked at yourself and felt like that wasn't you, and then you add on the pressures of societal norms and the gender norms that were pushed on us as we grow up, and then you have a huge disconnect as you look into that mirror and you see someone that is not you. It can be a lot more intense for some people, and it can be very little for some people, and some people don't really see that until they hit a moment of euphoria, which I'll get into later. But it's very much for me, it's kind of painful. It feels a little bit like heartbreak when I see something that doesn't quite vibe with how I feel. And so it can come and go. I feel like it comes in waves for me, especially because I am a little bit more fluid with my expressions. But it feels like I'll look in the mirror topless and I'll see these bags I got on my chest. And sometimes I feel like I just got stabbed right through the heart. And it can continue from there because, heartbreak isn't something that just happens once and then disappears immediately. It stays for a while. So it can affect me for a couple of days, where I'll have really, really good days, like a week, where I am doing really, really well and I am fine with my chest and I can go binderless at home and be fine. And then I'll hit that one moment where I look in the mirror and I see them and I feel a disconnect from what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling inside of that mirror. And heartbreak all over again. And it plays in with my depression. I feel like that really, really well. But for me, that's what dysphoria is. And so there's a difference between dysphoria and dysmorphia. Dysphoria is usually used in the community as a catch-all for it, but dysphoria can still only be between someone and their gender. A lot of people, especially in the community that Harris and I are in, can be completely fine with the body they have, but still feel a disconnect between the gender that they've been assigned. They've been assumed as.
So it's more of a social thing rather than a connection to your body.
Yeah. And so there can be people who have dysphoria without the body dysmorphia. But then for a lot of people the same, they come hand in hand. So for me, I had both. I had the dysphoria both with my body and with my gender. This is something so cool and very interesting as I've learned as I get more and more into the community, is finding out how many people have we're all such individuals, and we all have such different ideas and wants and needs and desires and dysphorias, and there's so many things that are available to us to help that. And that's just one of the cool things that I've learned the more I get into it, is how different everybody can be.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of the journey for me has been, I think at the very beginning, I thought my dysphoria is purely social. So in the way that people perceive me and talk to me and understand me sort of emotionally and mentally, and that was how I started. But I remember over time I started to think, oh, I don't have to wear this or that anymore, and if I don't want to, and actually I don't know if I really like these more kind of stereotypically feminine things. And then over time I started to wear those sorts of things less and less, and I felt much more on androgynous right in the middle. And then I remember one day, I think I'd only been out for a year or two. It was maybe a year, I think. And I was in the bathroom. I was fully dressed, and I was wearing this elbow length grey top that I'd got from a men's section. And I really loved this shirt. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, something really looks wrong here. And I just couldn't work it out for a good couple of minutes. It was really, like you say, it was like a really bizarre emotional reaction. And I couldn't tell where it was from. And as I looked and I really questioned myself, I realized it was because of my chest. Now, luckily, I don't have a very large chest, but it's definitely there, and it really shocked me. And like you said, you were weird, kind of off for a couple of days, and I felt a bit strange as well. That was the beginning of it. But as I've said before, like I came out 6 years ago. Well, to my friends at first, and it's been really up and down since then. And 2 years ago, I was very intent that I would start microdosing with testosterone and book in for a referral or whatever to get top surgery to have a more masculine chest. And all of that started to happen right before I went traveling. And I realized that I'd put myself under this huge amount of pressure to do all of these things before I started traveling. And I just thought it's too much and I can't do that now. So I've kind of accepted the way things are at the moment. But yeah, it is really weird. However, I've found that socially, the more accepting that people are socially, and the less that people gender me incorrectly, the less severe my physical dysphoria is, I think, because I'm not reminded of it.
I have a similar experience with that as far as the getting gendered correctly and being treated correctly in public and among the people you're with. Is I always had bottom dysphoria. I've always had that even before I knew what it was, even before I knew, like I talked in the first episode, before I had the words or the knowledge of any of this. I've always had problems with the set I've got down there. And it really affected my view of sex, along with the trauma I went through, and I had to deal with that. But I never had an issue with my chest until I came out. So when I started on testosterone and started binding and presenting this way, I noticed the more that I got misgendered in public, the more I was hyperconscious of my chest. And it has now become to the point where I suffer more from top dysphoria than I did from bottom dysphoria. I still struggle with it, but I got my $500 penis back in the closet now. And it's so I've got ways around that, but I have badonkadonk chest here. Like, I am equal size ass and chest. You can't get totally flat with these things. Like, even with the testosterone has changed the way my body holds fat. So I mean, I have grandma saggy boobs over here. Even with that, even with that, I still can't get totally flat. And then you struggle with, there's a lot of back and forth in my brain of, well, maybe if you double bind or if you wore a sports bra and did that, but that's, you don't do that, because if you do that, you damage yourself. Like, you can break some ribs, you can cause tissue damage, and tissue damage complicates top surgery. And so it's really important to do it safely and correctly. But there's some times where you just sit there and you're looking in the mirror and you're like, I just look like I'm walking around in a sports bra. It's totally obvious. But that's when I like to go, and instead of just looking down, is look sideways at myself in the mirror, because then I realize that I look a lot flatter than I actually think I look like. For some reason, looking down, it still looks like you've got the big chest, but sideways it's that way. But it turned into something huge for me when I never gave it a second thought before.
Yeah.
And it all had to do with my social transition. And so now I do have it a lot less now. Since I was laid off back in April, I have worn it maybe 10 times total for me to go out in public. Like when I go grocery shopping is the only time I put it on. And I've been mostly okay. My roommates are great. They've never really had any issues with misgendering me, or I mean, the only time Steven had any issues with my name was actually when I changed from Alec to Jordan. so, so it's those are the only times that I've really had any type of interaction that I've had to wear a binder in, and it's been awesome. But if this had happened a year ago, I probably would have been wearing my binder every day despite being home and doing nothing. And it's just kind of, brains are dumb. You want them to work right, and they just don't.
Yeah, I actually feel more dysphoric wearing anything at all, wearing any kind of sports bra or binder or bra than wearing nothing. I feel much more. I mean, I guess it's an easier option for me being smaller chested anyway. But
Yeah.
I find a lot of liberation in not wearing anything at all that you need. That yeah. So I just pretend that. I guess I pretend that they're not there most of the time, and just dress how I would if I didn't have them.
Yeah, if I'm distracted or I'm not moving, then it's easy just to like, I mean, they're not at the back of my brain like they normally are as I'm out in public. But, when you're laying in bed and you roll over and they just flop to the other side, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I got them titties.
Do you know what? My ex that I dated a couple of years ago is the doctor of neuroscience, and they explained to me about the actual supposed theory of dysphoria, if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
Okay. So my ex is a doctor and studies like brains and neurons and all that kind of thing. Really fascinating. And as you can imagine, we had a lot of conversations about science and brains, and they were also non-binary, trans feminine. So we had that in common as well. So we talked about this sort of thing all the time, and it was super interesting. And having a partner that can explain brains to you as well as being non-binary, it was very sexy, as you might imagine.
Is that why I have a boner now?
So the theory is, like with phantom limb syndrome, so
Yeah.
if somebody loses a limb in an accident, or they've been ill or something, and they have that limb removed, or they lose it or whatever, a lot of people in that situation will still experience that limb even though it's not there anymore, because you have a map in your brain of what your body is, or where all of your fingers and toes and everything else is, so that you have some kind of neurological map and awareness of your body. And the theory is, and I don't know how much research has been done on this, but it was explained to me by this doctor that when you have gender dysphoria in terms of your body, what's happened is that the map in your brain of how your body is supposed to be doesn't match what you've actually got. And that's why there is often this mismatch that is so fundamental and also so well treated with medical and surgical intervention, because the second that you can match that up, your brain goes, oh, it's like a big relief. And like I'm in my body now, I'm not in somebody else's. I always explain to people when talking about my own dysphoria, and they're like, oh, but you're not ugly. And I'm like, no, bless you. I don't think that I'm ugly. It's like driving a car. That's fine, but it's just not your car. And every day people are like, this is your car. And you're like, no, it isn't. My car is similar, but it isn't this one. It's like the seat being in the wrong position and the mirrors being slightly at the wrong angle, and just everything's just slightly off, and it's not your car. That's how I feel about it anyway.
I really love that analogy, though. That's the mirror just being slightly off. It's
Yeah.
I always say that I feel like I'm in my body, but 3 inches to the left.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good analogy as well.
But as you were starting to get into that, and because when you're talking, I kind of lean back so that I don't have my heavy breathing in the background of your audio. And so I leaned back as you started talking about it. And then as I realized the direction where you were going with the phantom limb syndrome, I got really excited. I love talking about this. I love it. Uh, and I'm very into science and into the
Mm.
medical aspect of things. Like that's why I was going into psychiatry. It's a medical degree.
Mm.
And as you got more into it, I leaned more and more forward and started. I almost kind of vibrated a little bit. I was like, "This is my stuff. I love talking about it," and it makes sense. It makes so much sense
Yeah,
because it's all in the brain. And if your brain is like, "No, I'm this," and your body is like, "Well, I look like this," there's gonna be interference in between the two.
yeah.
And I really really like that. That was awesome to hear about. And so now we've been talking about our experiences with the dysphoria, but I also want to talk about the opposite end of this. And this is it can be a hot topic, hot button topic for a lot of people inside of the community, but we're pretty set in our view of this as Transection podcasts that
Mm.
euphoria is absolutely just as valid as dysphoria. And people who don't experience dysphoria but experience euphoria are just as valid as we are. And
Yeah.
euphoria is actually what clicked it for me. Because obviously I had a lot of pain and discomfort. And you mentioned earlier that your friend said, "Oh, but you're not ugly." And it was funny is because back before I had the words and had the knowledge that I have now, I would look in the mirror and I thought I was super, super ugly. And I would swipe left on so many really hot guys on Tinder because I didn't think I was cute. And now I look back at the old photos of me, I'm like, damn, like I do me. uh so I dealt with all of that, but then as I came out, and as I mentioned in the first episode, I first came out as non-binary and was not going to change really anything about my appearance, but I was researching a lot into it. And the first time I got my binder in and I put it on, and then the first time that I heard my roommates use my name and my pronouns, and it felt like I had just had a 2 hour massage with a wax pill with like a pineapple fruit cup in one hand and a margarita in the other and emerged into the sunlight. Like it was one of the most incredible feelings I ever felt. And I went, this is it. This feels amazing. This feels in a way I've never felt before.
Mm.
And having that jolt of this feels good is what really solidified like that's what clicked it for me. That's what made it official. Like this is me. And so
Mm.
people who haven't really had dysphoria or haven't really had to deal with the internal struggle with that, like obviously they have curiosities and there is something different, which is what pushes them to try it. But it's like uh I have a friend who's a trans woman, and when she discovered that she was trans by wearing a dress. And I don't remember why they had done it. It was for a play or something. And they felt so amazing in it that they started to explore that version of themselves. And now here they are years later, and she looks fantastic. And to say that she's not as valid as people who have to deal with dysphoria, I think is just awful because she's just as trans as I am.
Mm.
And I have very, very strong opinions about it because I understand what causes dysphoria and the fact that we are seeing a huge reduction in dysphoric teens because they're starting to be raised in accepting environments. So we're seeing more of the euphoria realizations than the dysphoria realizations. And I just don't understand the requirement of suffering for people.
Yeah, I think that sometimes people reach a point and they feel like they really earned it. They've really, really gone through the ringer and they have earned it. And I I wonder if there's some shame around that or something, or I don't know, but I think, I mean, I've experienced it in other areas of my life. Like, for example, when I used to have a hair and makeup design company, and I trained to do hair like 12 years ago. And it was very much the attitude that when you're an apprentice hairdresser, that you bleed for it. You get paid shit money. You get
Hmm.
spoken to like shit, and you have to suffer through the whole thing. And I remember I brought it up with them once. I was like, why is this the culture? Why is this the culture to make people suffer at the beginning? Like to And they were like, well, this is how you earn your stripes. You know, you're not a proper hairdresser unless you've been through 2 to 3 years of being treated like dirt. And I remember thinking, like, this is so bizarre. And I was like, but why? Why does it have to continue to be that way? And they said, well, I had to, you have to. So I think maybe there's like a jealousy or something, that someone can't see somebody else thriving with the same or similar issues, um, and believe that it could possibly be real, because I guess maybe that's how they identify themselves, and they're like, well, I've had to struggle, um, and yeah, I just find it really strange and very gatekeeping. And also I think it's such a negative thing to explain to others that being trans in the first place is something painful and it's something awful, and it's it's something that you have to suffer through. And of course that is the case for many people, but I think to make that a prerequisite for being trans, I think is really damaging and very negative. And I don't think it's right that our community would be represented in such a negative, painful way, when what we're trying to do is to support each other to all be better off and to have better mental health and to be loved more and have better lives all round. And I don't see that being obsessed with pain is going to get us there.
And I suffered, so you have to suffer. I really hate that mentality. Like,
Mm.
I suffered a lot, and I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through.
Yeah.
And so that's just, I kind of can't understand the thought process from it. And I have people that come to me for advice or to talk to because they're going through something, and I get this a lot. I get the every single time I'll get the message, I'm sorry, I know you've been through worse. I'm probably overreacting, or I shouldn't bother with you with this because you've been through worse and stuff. And I'm like, just because someone went through something different doesn't mean that what you went through is any better.
Mm.
Like, it doesn't make it hurt less. And I would much rather pull up than punch down, because we're all in this together. And so to sit there and be like, no, in order to be in this community, you have to suffer. And I really dislike that. We're fighting a really hard fight right now for acceptance, for our rights, for a lot going on right now.
Mm.
And I would much rather, I know that I'm not going to have certain things as I need them now, as I'm younger. But that doesn't mean that I can't fight for them so that somebody 10 years in the future can have access to it.
Yeah.
And we need everybody we can get. And internal fighting like that is just completely counterintuitive. And I do have some people on my friends list that have pretty strong opinions on the opposite of what I got. And I just don't understand sitting there and just hating like that. It takes energy.
Yeah. And I also feel from maybe like not necessarily political, but I think it's very much like a toxic masculine trait to categorize to death. And I think that a more balanced way of doing it is to say, yes, there are categories, but we have to understand that it's a very human thing to want to categorize everything, and that within that, the second that you've categorized something, it's got a very limited scope. So I think it happens with all sorts of like diagnoses or conditions or anything like that. Not that we are a condition, but I just mean as an example, a lot of people all have the same condition or situation, but the symptoms are always different. So I think dysphoria is a symptom, but it's not the diagnosis. Do you know what I mean? It's not that being trans or non-binary is a diagnosis, but I just mean to draw the parallel that yes, dysphoria is part of the journey for many of us, but it's not a part of the journey for every single one of us. It's just prevalent.
What I was leading into earlier with children being raised in accepting environments is people have more freedom to express things now. Like these things are getting, even just in the last couple of years, things are more and more open. The words are there. The internet is here. And people are allowed to explore themselves and find their identity. And I've hatched a couple of eggs, and a couple of them have mentioned, as we've talked about their thoughts and feelings, they always mention that what if they explore and then find out that they're cis in the end? And I always tell them, I would much rather have someone explore their identity, discover themselves out, and if in the end they find out that they identify with what they were assumed, great. They explored and they found out, and now they don't have a what if. I would much rather have people explore. And you don't have to be trans to express yourself differently. I have a friend who really loves to dress a little bit more feminine and paints his nails, and he always has this hyper conscious thought of, I can't wear those boots out. They're my favorite boots and I love them, but they look a little feminine, so I can't wear them out because in case somebody makes a comment about it or something like that. And he's slowly been getting angry about that and wanting to just wear what he wants to wear. And he is one of the most masculine men I know. Like, fights fires, runs chainsaws all summer. And for him to be afraid to express himself in a feminine way because of how he's been treated in the past, like, it's kind of heartbreaking. But it doesn't just affect us, it affects everybody. So it's like, I went through it, and he also goes through it, and he's cis. But I would never sit there and tell him to not explore himself that way, because that's what makes all of us individuals.
Yeah, and I mean, that's also what brings us joy, little things that we like. You know, I can only imagine the hundreds of years of people who have gone without the smallest of things that would have made the biggest differences to how much they enjoyed their own lives. And it just seems completely ridiculous to me that we have gate kept so many people, generally speaking, everybody potentially, depending on how accepting and open your household is, your town or whatever, and your school and everything else. And we've done that for hundreds of years. And I just think it's such a result of being controlled and stereotypes being preached and people being ashamed to diverge in any way whatsoever. And I think it all comes down to control. And if people behave the way that you tell them, and they're shamed anytime that they set their foot outside of the line, even a tiny bit, it keeps everything in order. And it stops people thinking for themselves. And I think it's extremely coercive. I find a lot of these stereotypes and behaviors that are associated with being weak or being undesirable. And it's just such a load of bollocks. I've had so many people say, like, to me about things that I do and say, and you know, is it going to affect my chances of getting a partner, and maybe I should suppress parts of myself. And it's just so mad that we would even consider like going out with somebody just because we conformed enough to please them. I just find that so bizarre.
I agree.
And I would be so pleased if we get to the point in our lifetime where all of these things are just not held as important anymore, and people really can do what they want without being shamed as much as they are now. Euphoria for me is definitely, it's not something that happens to me very often, but then I don't think dysphoria is something that happens to me very often either. However, in fact, I put up a picture on our Instagram, I think a week or two ago. It was really sunny and really warm, and I was wearing like a black vest top, and then I had like this ice pink capped linen shirt over the top that's sort of baggy. And I was wearing glasses because I was going in the car, and I do have glasses, but I'm lazy and only wear them if I'm going in a car or whatever. And I just caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror with my shaved head and looking like that, and I was like, oh my god, Euphoria! I haven't seen you in so long. I was so excited. But yeah, I don't know how often. I think for me it's striking this really, really particular balance of feminine and masculine, and it's in a way that I can't easily replicate it. It's like just once in a blue moon I'll see it, and it's there, and I'm like,
it's like catching lightning.
Hey,
it's like catching lightning in a bottle.
Yes, it's really bizarre. I mean, the rest of the time I don't feel terrible, but there are these occasional moments I'm like, oh my god, and it's like I look in the mirror and I'm like, there I am. I haven't seen myself in so long. Like the
it's
real
a gender
me.
orgasm.
Yeah, kind of. I'm just so excited. It's like, I don't know, it's like better than Christmas. I'm like, oh my god, it's me. I've seen myself, and it's so exciting, and it's always really unexpected, and I can't reproduce it either. I really don't know where that comes from or what I would need to do to have it again. So it's just something I accept is something that just pops up occasionally, and there's nothing I could do to reproduce it. Although it's funny actually, one of the things that I really like aesthetically is a curly moustache like Poirot. And even before I knew about my gender identity, I was always obsessed with moustaches. I always wanted one. And even for fancy dress, if I ever got a chance to draw on a curly moustache or stick on a fake one, I loved it. And in fact, my girlfriend that I had a couple of years before I came out, I think it was like 2 years before I came out, she and I were together for nearly a year and a half, and she actually bought me a travel mug that had a French lady on the front with a beret and a massive curly moustache.
I love it.
And it's so funny, I look back at that now and I'm like, yes, that is exactly right. And it's so funny actually, both of my ex-girlfriends both had these really strong intuitions about me that I didn't really realize until later, but it must have been there. And it's funny actually, but even though I haven't medically or surgically transitioned in any way at the moment, there have been times where I bump into people and it's almost like they see my energy before they actually see what I look like, and they get confused. And in those, I do get euphoric in those moments actually, when they're really not sure what they're looking at other than a human. And I get these moments of euphoria where I'm like, oh, they're confused. That means I've somehow on some plane of existence produced like the right balance. I feel really seen, and it's lovely. And yeah, seeing people confused is it's really joyful for me. And I'm not saying that because I'm some sort of weird sadist. I think it's genuinely like that I really do feel seen, that they've clocked on and they've got it, and they don't realize that they've got it, but I know that they have, if that makes sense.
yeah, it does. I just are you a boy or a girl? No, I'm a threat.
I'm dead.
And I found for me to get, like, I'm starting to see the patterns of where my really good, like my euphoria will hit me. And I've noticed it's usually when I'm doing some type of gender fucked thing um, where my beard's growing in and I haven't shaved it in a while, and then I do my makeup.
Yeah.
And I'll find those moments I can catch. It doesn't happen every time I do my makeup, but it's happened enough that I know that I can. It's kind of like I'm chasing that high.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll find a hit, and sometimes I won't. But it's that's usually when I find it. When I find my little sense of self is when I'm in my makeup. And a really really good time for me is I went to my first drag show just before the pandemic hit in February, and I mean, I went dressed masculine, but I did my makeup. And the sheer amount of validation and euphoria I got there because I could be me in my truest form. Uh, yeah, that night was really, really good. That felt really, really good. But now I'm just kind of chasing that high, trying to find that euphoria.
Yeah.
Because, like we talked about in the first episode, life is mundane. So, trying to
Mm.
find those little moments where you feel good, it's that's also
Yeah.
fun because then you're exploring yourself and finding things that you like and that you don't like. And
Mm. And I have to say that when you're really in your euphoric state, where you've got your sort of your stubble or your beard and your makeup, and you're really feeling it, and you take those selfies, I really see that. I really see, like, it really is like you're this really bold and quite complete version of yourself. And that's when I get the most messages from my gay male friends asking if you're single.
hey, boys, I am, and my inbox is open.
Are you going to set me up with any of your friends? Because I feel like this is a bit one way at the minute.
Oh, I think I forgot to send it to you. No, I definitely got a Harris is so hot message in my inbox after the first episode.
Incredible.
And my response was, they're also really tall.
I want to crush you if you're into that.
And then also
Amazing.
the other half of me was like, no, mine.
Get your own. Get off, mate.
Exactly. This is my Harris. Go find your own.
Amazing. Jordan, what do you think would have been different had you been brought up with this knowledge about gender identity? What do you think
Oh,
would be different now?
oh, everything. If I had been brought up in either an accepting environment or in an environment that allowed me to discover these terms, like the advent of social media had happened earlier and had access to it, I think a lot of painful things I went through would have never happened or would have happened less frequently. I
Mm.
am a suicide attempt survivor more than once, and two of those happened while I was in high school. And
Mm.
if because of this huge disconnect I felt over myself, one of them was immediately after I had kind of consigned myself to presenting and being feminine and following all of the roles that were expected of me. And if I had had access to the knowledge that I didn't have to be that way and that one day I would be okay, that would have changed the whole trajectory of it. I don't think I would have gotten involved in the alcohol and the drugs I did. I think I would have probably been a lot more stable throughout all of it. Obviously, I would have struggled more with, trying to present and dealing with, you know, the assholes that live in small towns. But it honestly would have changed my whole trajectory there,
Mm.
knowing that one day I would be what I am now.
Yeah, I think for me, it would have just saved so many years of confusion. And I'm the sort of person that I have to be in a situation, particularly with relationships and friendships. I have to actually experience that to learn from it. And maybe that's not a profound thing to say, but my sister always said that she's younger than me, and she always said that she watched what I did, and that helped to teach her all the things that she shouldn't do, or if she was going to break the rules, she would watch me break them first and then do it better. And she
she would then break the rules and do it better.
yeah. And
Ugh.
but also she watched me go through some really horrific relationships. I had one long-term relationship in my late teens for over 3 years that was abusive, and she watched all of that going on in horror, and as a result she's only ever loved one man, and that's her husband. And I feel like it's amazing that she has managed to get that far without getting burnt. And I just think that's kind of incredible, because I always have to throw myself in at the deep end to understand something. And I feel like, especially where gender's concerned, that it's taken me so many years, first of all, to unpick all of my learning from my very traditional parents. And then also, I mean, they're not, I guess they would argue that in many ways they're very liberal and contemporary, and that's definitely true. But there's still a lot there that's very traditional and not for me. And then on top of that, then learning about the gender identity stuff and the fact that I've been confused since day dot about. I mean, I'm not confused now, but I felt like it delayed me connecting to other people, understanding who I was and who I was socially and in relation to other people and other situations. And I think there's a lot of different aspects that have led to me being here now, and I don't regret it, but I do feel that not knowing about sexual orientation and gender identity has taken up so much of my adulthood, learning about it and understanding what it means for me, because I didn't have the opportunity to learn that and explore that, at least emotionally, when I was younger, mentally. And I do see this a lot actually in our community, that so many of us often feel left behind or delayed in our development. And I mean, that's not
Yeah.
true for everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
I definitely feel it's true for me and a lot of people that I know.
I feel like I didn't truly start my life, that I didn't truly start living until I was 27 years old.
Mm.
Because that's when I discovered myself, and I'm still learning. And it's kind of, I always laugh at myself because it always makes me feel so old. But a lot of the people that I've met and become friends with and are in similar stages of their transitions, either socially or medically, like I am, and we're all in similar spots. And then when I remember that they're like 20, I feel like a non-trad student. I feel like I started college 10 years after I graduated high school, and now I'm trying to keep up with all of these whippersnappers, And I guess maybe it's just the big heart that I have, what I was mentioning earlier with Euphoria, but it always makes me happy to see them young and going through the things I'm going through now, because that means that all of those years I spent living in a cloud, living 3 inches to the left of my body, they're going to have, because they were able to have access to the things I'm having access to now at an earlier age in their life. But I started late. What I was discussing earlier about the things I went through in high school is we don't see ourselves making it to a certain point. And so now here I am. I turned 30 in a year, and I'm in the same place as these 20-year-olds. But because I just didn't think it was going to happen. I had zero hope that I was going to see 20, and then it was 21, and then I hit 25, and now I'm sneezing at 30, and here I am still, and no idea what I'm doing with my life.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and I think that's often the case as well for people who have grown up with trauma, because when you're in survival mode so much, and this has been true for me as well, and recently, when you've survived trauma and you're in survival mode constantly, there is no a year from now. It's all about getting through now, or maybe even getting through this week.
yeah, it's
And
always making it to the next day.
yeah,
Has how I've lived most of my life, is I just got to make it to the next day. I can't think further ahead than that. It's the next. Sometimes I can get it to a week or maybe even a month, but it's always been I got to survive to the next day. And now I'm at this point in my life where I'm like, oh, I got to think about 10 years from now.
Yeah, I had a realization earlier that this decade I will be 40. I had a real moment of like, oh, okay, so what do I want?
Yeah.
And I only just realized that now. And I was like, oh, yeah. And yeah, I see that a lot with people who've had mental health issues and they've survived traumas and stuff, that there's often this feeling of like, oh, this surprise, this shock, I'm still here. Oh, yeah. Oh, I didn't expect this. And I've had older people tell me, oh, you should get a pension and this, that, and the other. And that just seems like a crazy idea to me. I'm like, but what for? I don't even know if I'm going to be here. And it just seems like so far away. I can't even really think of it.
But that's for every moment that I have where I'm like a little bitter about starting so late and wishing that I had had access to this and like, wishing I'd been able to start, because there is a difference in how well medical transition works. Um, at least for trans masculine, I have never looked into the trans feminine because it's not applicable to me, but at least for testosterone hormonal changes, there is a difference in how successful and how well it is if you start before the age of 25 and after 25. So because I started after, I've been, concerned that it wouldn't go as well, and I've been lucky. It's gone very, very well for me. But for all of my bitterness about that, I'm kind of glad, because now here I am, 2 months shy of 29 years old, just 2 years in. I'm a toddler in 2 years, and I'm here showing people that are like me that I exist, that we can exist, that we survive, that we're here, and that I am doing well, and I am planning for the future, and I am alive. And just knowing that just by existing, I can give someone hope makes it all worth it to me. And I mean, I've been in trauma brain. I've dealt with my trauma since started when I was about 10 or 11. And I didn't get proper help for it until I was 25, and then started transition a year later. I've spent so long living in trauma that getting out of it, all I want to do is make sure, do the best I can to make sure that nobody else goes through that. All I want to do is to help someone, to give them some type of, it'll be okay, this isn't permanent, one day you'll be okay. One day you'll be able to walk down the road and not be completely terrified of what's behind you. One day you'll be able to go to a crowded concert. One day it will be okay. I'm here, I exist, I went through it, and if you need any help, here's my hand. That's my entire mission statement for my life right now.
Yeah. And I think because I lived with PTSD for 20 years, and I mentioned this in my interview with Amanda Wells, was that I thought that you just lived with PTSD. I'd been to so many different people who didn't really seem to offer much help around it or suggest that there was much that I could do about it. And by the time I went to Amanda and she said, oh, did you want to deal with your PTSD? And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, get rid of it. And I was like, you can do that? And I remember thinking, I was like, I wonder how it would be to not live with it, because I had it since I was 9 years old. And I remember thinking, like, if I don't have PTSD, what would that even feel like, or what would it look like? Or when the subject of my PTSD comes up, how will I react? If I am not triggered, then what would that look like?
Yeah.
And it was such, for the first time as an adult at 29, I didn't have PTSD anymore, and it was gone. It's enabled me to talk to people about their issues and not to kind of bulk when people bring up things that are difficult, but also, like you, to say, I've lived with that too, and I feel fairly healed from it, and I've never had a trigger since in 3 years. And I think just to say that and just to be that living example of, that things do get better, and you can have a really horrific story, as both of us do in some respects, and you can still come out the other side and have a really good life and not be consumed by it and not be held back by it. And I think that particularly for our community, we talk about trauma all the time, because I don't know if it gets to us more because we are unsupported from young, and us struggling with our sense of self and being confused maybe makes us easier targets. Or I wonder if it could also be because, like we've said before, Jordan, in our community we do so much self-exploration and so much questioning that I don't know if we just become more used to talking about it and sharing those things, as well as being more introspective. But I do find it interesting actually how much trauma does come up in our community, and how well versed we are actually in talking about it.
Yeah, because up until I came into the community, I really didn't meet a whole lot of people that had, been through what I've been through. And then to be presented suddenly with so many people that had, it was kind of really shocking. I was like, wow, this is really prevalent. But I have a very, very large cis friend group in real life. And then I have my online friends in life are 90% queer. And they, being open and talking about it, I've noticed a lot of my cis friends bring up things that had happened to them or that they had been through that are very similar or the same, but they just don't talk about it.
Mm.
They don't. And it's so prevalent among so many communities and so many, like, trauma and abuse is a huge commonality. And I think because we're more apt to talk to each other about things, because we had to talk to each other to explore our identity, it makes it easier for us to talk about our trauma, because now we found a community, we found a family. But
Yeah.
cis people don't have that. Like, their type of communities is like the sports crowd or the gaming crowd, or like those are their communities. Well, ours is all, we're trying to survive. And
Yeah.
so when they came into contact with me and I started developing these friendships, and I'm incredibly open about what happened to me, and I talk about it, and I talk about the terrible therapy I went through, and then I talk about finding my new therapy. Like, I'm very open about it, and as I start talking to them about it, all of a sudden they start up with their stories and stuff like that, and then they've gone and they're like, oh, well, I was talking to my other friend and they opened up about this, and so I'm kind of like having this little ripple effect
Mm.
of being so open and communicative among my cis friends, and they're starting to do it. And it's like, I feel like I'm kind of like the insidious little transgender friend that is dropping like self-love and care and non-toxic coping mechanisms, like guerrilla warfare tactics. Like, you're gonna love yourself whether you like it or not.
I was just gonna say that.
Love yourself, damn it. And do as I say, not as I do. But it's it's a double little shock for me, because I got it coming into the community, and then as I've made friends, um, real, true, good friends, and picking up ones from high school that I had and bringing them back into my life, and just having the solidity that I haven't had in a decade, and opening up to them and finding them opening up back, it's kind of been really cool. There's a lot of similarities, but a whole lot of differences.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, I mentioned it on the Q&A episode, but on Facebook particularly, because I'm quite open with things and I share things, and I also shit post a lot, which means, for those of you who don't know, just sharing a lot of posts that are hilarious but just bullshit. I
See,
have
mine are more horrifying.
yeah. Like bean jelly, or jello you would call it. Ugh.
Or the red pizza.
Baked beans. That's baked beans for you English people. um so I think because I'm so open about a lot of these things, as a result I have lots of people contacting me for similar reasons, or I have quite a few friends from school who I've not seen in 14 years since I left, and they messaged me about their job. So some of them are in human resources, and they message like, oh, you know, how do I support this person? Or we're reorganizing this form at work or whatever, and how do we make this inclusive, and what options should we put here and there? And that'll often be the starting point, but then people will share with me. So recently I got put back on anxiety medication, and I've not had anything like that for over 10 years. And I've had people message me about something else, and then they'll share, oh, I'm on that same medication, and, you know, we can talk about these things. And I don't know, I know so many people, particularly, like you say, particularly cisgender, heteronormative people, who don't seem to have sometimes this introspection or this openness because they can choose not to, whereas I guess we can't really choose. And so often I find that they're very private about their issues, and therefore there's not a lot of deep connection going on. And I have some people close to me I find are extremely private about things. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I do find that it seems to me that they struggle more often, and that they, you know, I find that when older friends are messaging me and I've not seen them for however many years, that I can strike up like a deep connection with people at the drop of a hat, you know, providing that we have some common ground. And I feel like that's something really good that we engender within our community, that we become very used to making friends online. Like, for Jordan and I have never met in person, not yet anyway. It will happen. But I think in our community we do this all the time, don't we? We make so many friends and have deep connections and deep friendships with people who are from very different backgrounds, and we share very vulnerable parts of ourselves. And I think there's so much to learn from that. I've often said to people, like, you know, learning about the LGBT community isn't just about learning definitions. It's so much more than that. It's an entire culture that potentially brings openness and broad-mindedness and acceptance for everyone, not just us.
This is something that I have found that I always like. Whenever I see it pop up, I always like to share it. But there's a little thing on Facebook that finding out that cis people just keep their name for the rest of their life. Changing a name can really be powerful. And usually for a lot of people that socially transition, this might be one of the only things they do is they change their name. And you can change your name even if you're not trans. I have a friend that absolutely despises her first name. She hates it. She's gone by her middle name and a nickname for her entire life. And she tried to change it to something that she feels good about. And she was met with so much resistance and what's the word I want to use here?
Vitriol.
Vitriol, exactly. When she did that she went back to going by her middle name and her nickname, and it really, really affected her. And I'm like, anybody can change your name. There's so much power in a name. That's the weird combination of sounds that you make with your wet mouth to respond to. It should be something that you enjoy, that you feel comfortable with, that you feel expresses yourself. And it brings so much power when you have a connection to that. Some people love their name and it works for them and it's good, but some people it just doesn't click. There's so many people who go by nicknames or by aliases and stuff, and I'm just change your name. You don't like it. And a lot of especially when I came out and changed my name, this is a conversation I had with my mom, and this is something my friend's mom had said. It was like, that's the name I gave you. That's the name I'm going to call you. And my response to that is, I don't have to accept a gift. The name was a gift, but it didn't work out for me. Like, maybe you gifted me a gift certificate to Victoria's Secret. It's not going to do anything for me right now. So I'll give it to someone that will use it, or I'll just throw it in the trash.
Thank you, but no thank you.
Thank you, but no thank you. It's you don't have to wear that name for your entire life if you don't vibe with it.
Yeah, definitely. I've had loads of cis people when we talk about my name change, which has been, I did that some years ago now, and sometimes we'll be alone and they'll go, I don't actually like my name.
You don't have to.
I'm like, that's okay. You can check. And they're like, oh, I wish that I could change it like you. And I'm like, you can. It's not different rules. You just get the same paperwork and you do it, and you can just change it. They're like, no, I couldn't possibly do that. And I'm like, why would you spend years of your life with a name that you fucking hate? It's ridiculous. I actually picked my name. My first name Harris is my family's last name, and Hill was my mum's maiden name, and then Eddie, which is my middle name. So my old name, which I'm not going to share with you, and please don't ask, but I always had three names. I had a beginning, first, set, middle, and last name. Oh, I should put my teeth back in, and then I could actually put a sentence together. Sorry. And so I knew that I wanted Harris Hill, but I've always had three names, and every time, so it took me 4 times to get the paperwork right with the solicitor in order to get the name change official and done, it took 2 fucking years, and it was so difficult. It was ridiculous. And in England, it's actually really easy to do, if it's providing that you know where to go and what to do. But as I was filling out the paperwork, I couldn't not have 3 names, and this name Eddie kept popping up in my head. And I'm very much a spiritual person, so I was like, oh, I think I'm receiving this name, and it kept popping up. I was like, no, it's silly. That's not like, that name's nothing to do with me. I'm not going to put that on my official legal paperwork. It's just silly. But every time I went to go and write it, I couldn't not, and I felt like I was betraying myself. So I wrote it in the end. So I changed it to Harris Eddie Hill, and it's stuck ever since. And I like it now.
It's very you.
Thanks. Do you know what? It's so funny, because after I changed my name and I came out at work, because I came out socially, like to friends and
Mm-hmm.
family younger, and then I waited until I think it was 3. Yeah, it must be about 3 years ago since I came out professionally. That sounds about right. And loads of people afterwards, they were like, oh, I'm really pleased that you've come out and you've changed your name. They said the name that you started with wasn't you at all. It was really weird. And I was like, oh, okay, that's validation I was not expecting. So yeah.
With me, I actually just got my letter back from the SRP. It's a little bit more difficult here and really expensive. State by state every state does it differently. So in my state, in Utah, I have to send off a letter to the sex offender registry so that they can stamp and say I'm not on it, because you can't change your name if you're on it. Just got that back, and now I got to go spend $375 to file it. And then I have to wait for a court date in order to get my name changed. And this is my second attempt. So
Wow.
the first time I did go for a gender marker change and it was denied. So I am trying it again with just the name change. And so hopefully that'll go through. But when I was picking my name, I've always loved the name Alex. Always loved it. And so that was the first name I went for. And so I went for Alex for a little bit, and then I decided that, it didn't really quite fit quite well. So then I went by Alexander. And so my last name I picked is from my great grandma. And so I kind of went for more of a different spelling of Alexander. And so there was a K in it. So then I started going by Alec. And I went by Alec for, year and a half?
Mm.
And then my mom passed away. I had already picked Jordan as my middle name because my mom wanted to name one of her boys Jordan. My older brother was Nathaniel. And so then my name was going to be Jordan. And my mom's best friend had a baby 2 months. His birthday's in June, and named him Jordan. So, and then I obviously came out, assumed female. So then I was assumed a woman. So then I got the feminine name. And I always hated that name because all of my siblings had quote unquote regular names, and I had the weird one. that my mom thought she made up. And so I never had anything on any of the like the keychains or any of like the little souvenir things. My name was never on it, and I hated it. And everybody always slaughtered it and called me the wrong name, and I hated it. I always hated it. And so I picked Jordan because it was like a little bit of like a kick to my mom, and like, you still got your Jordan. And because I had two little sisters after me, so she never had another boy. And so I picked that. And then so after I'd been going by Alexander Jordan and going by Alec, and after my mom passed away, I just kept having this feeling that I needed to go by Jordan. And so about 8 months after she passed away, I started going by Jordan. So that was back in December. And so I was like, hey friends, guess what? We're not done. I'm shaking things up again. I started going by Jordan, and it feels like I just put on a jacket that fits perfectly. It is tailored to my exact shape, and I feel good in it, and I really like it. And so it just kind of felt that way. And I keep getting a lot of my friends saying, you look like a Jordan, or that suits you. And I'm
Yeah.
like, thanks. Like, I picked it myself, thank you.
That's beautiful. I agree with that. I think, yeah, it really does suit you. I mean, obviously I knew you when you were Alec,
Yeah.
which was fine, but I have to say, like, now that you're, since you've been Jordan, it's like I can't remember the feeling of the other name at all, or
Yeah.
anything else. Like, to me, it does
It just
seem
didn't. Yeah,
right.
it didn't fit. Mm-mm. It was like I put the left shoe on the right foot.
Yeah.
And so now, yeah, so now it's Jordan Alexander Roosh, which I love because my initials are Jar. And I didn't embroider everything.
Mine's How do you
And
pronounce your last name, actually? I've never heard you say it before.
Roosh.
You're right.
That part of my family came from Switzerland, so
Yeah,
I
because
guess I should probably actually share the story of my grandma Sophie, because it's actually really cool, and why I picked that last name. Legally, currently, my last name is my ex-husband's last name, so I didn't really want to. I really like it. I really like the name. It's Estrada, and I've always really liked that last name. But it's kind of weird changing your whole name and then keeping your ex-husband's last name. So,
yeah.
but I didn't really want to go back to Woodward. There's nothing wrong with it. I just, it didn't feel like a fit, And so I'm just kind of looking around and wondering, what should I change my last name to? And I wanted to keep it in the family because I didn't want my family to feel like I was, abandoning them for this
Yeah.
new identity or anything like that. Like, this was who I am, and I wanted to make sure I kept it in the family. So I thought about going Norton, which is my mom's maiden name. And then my brother shared this article for Women's History Month. Or no, it was International Women's Day is what it was. And it was about my great, great, great grandma. And she is so cool. So she was born in Switzerland, and the family owned an inn, and they made enough money that they were able to send her to school. So she became a doctor. And she studied in Germany, met a man there, and got married. And he was unfaithful. So she divorced him. And this is the mid 1800s. So this is, unheard of. So she divorces him, and then she meets Mormon missionaries and joins the church and decides she wants to come to America. And the whole family was like, no, you don't. You're not going. You're not going anywhere. So they sent her off to live with her brother in Naples, and he couldn't convince her to stay. So he sent her off with enough money to come back if it didn't work out. She came to Utah. And she got here during General Conference, which is the big meeting they have twice a year. And the prophet at the time, Brigham Young, told her that she should marry this guy, Brother Mathis. And so she married my great 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 grandpa. They moved to St. George, and she found out she was the second wife. And she ended up having a baby with him, and she was very, very, she was treated very poorly by the other wife. And obviously, my grandma Sophie is not one to be pushed around. So she kind of puts up with it for a little bit, and then she finds out that they're mistreating her daughter and making her daughter do all the chores that the other kids should have been doing. So I think at one point she actually threw milk on the other wife. So she ended up divorcing him too, and just spent the rest of her life single, being a midwife down in St. George. And I thought that was very fitting for me, who was going against the entire culture here to be who I truly am, to take the name of my ancestor who gave the prophet the middle finger. So, and that's how I came to my last name. So,
That's
and it was
strong.
really, and I had always gone back and forth on how to pronounce it because obviously I have no living relatives that use that last name. And one day at the bar, I ran into two guys that were from Germany, and I asked them how they would pronounce it, and it was the way I had been, which is Rouge. So I'm like, okay, this works for me.
Yeah, nice. Because I learned a bit of German at school, and in my travels, I've been able to speak a bit of German,
Mm-hmm.
not well, I would add. And the first I had in my mind for ages that your last name was REU, which would be Roish.
Yeah, and that's how a lot of people do say it when they ask me. Is that they've been saying it that way in their head, and I'm like, nope, it's Rue like a Rue.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense. That's cool. That's a cool story, man. I think we've got some badass women in both of our families. My
absolutely.
grandmother, who only passed away, yeah, it's not even been 18 months. But she ran away with her husband, who wasn't her husband yet. They eloped, and he was married to somebody else.
Oh,
And they eloped to France. And basically, so she was the daughter. She was from India, and she came over to the UK when she was 9 years old. And she was the daughter of the former chief of police, I think, in wherever they were from in India. And her father had been in the army as well, and during the Second World War. And she was a war baby. She was born in 1940. No, so her dad was ex-military and was chief of police or whatever in India. And then the original wife of my grandfather, who he was still married to when he eloped with my grandmother, her dad, the first wife's dad, was high up in the military in England. So basically, they had a lot of people looking for them when they ran away together. And in France, they were staying in hotels and then not paying their bill by climbing out the window and climbing down the drain pipes and stuff to escape. And they were really kind of on the run. And my great grandfather's sort of contacts were out looking for them. And then the first wife's dad, he had people looking for them. And the only reason they came back is because my grandmother got pregnant with my mum.
that is quite the story.
Oh no, it's amazing. I was like, that's incredible. I mean, if she was
I
alive
love it.
now, I wouldn't share that because she would be like, "That's not how it happened. Everything was legit," and I'd be like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah, sure.
She was so funny. She was so like very traditional and very well spoken and had her very sort of old fashioned manners and things, but
Yeah.
underneath she was really naughty. My dad said that when he met my mum and they would go round to visit her, she would send my mum to make the tea and then tell my dad dirty jokes. Amazing. Jordan, did you want to talk about dicks?
Yes, I would love to talk about dicks. This is my favorite thing.
Was
So
there
now you've
anything
talked
specific, or just dicks in general?
just dicks in general. So we've talked, this episode has been about dysphoria and euphoria, and so we've talked about how it feels and a little bit of how we combat it. But I am now going to talk about some devices that are available to us that help us. And uh, there's all kinds of different ways. So obviously, I'm going to really be focusing heavily on transmasculine ways of fighting dysphoria. I am not transfeminine, so I don't have a huge working knowledge, but I will touch on some things that are available to them. And so let's talk dicks. So one of the I mentioned getting my Packer and the helicopter, and but that is one of the more common forms of fighting bottom dysphoria. They come in all kinds of shapes, sizes, colors, prices. I have a $7 dick, and I have a dick that I spent $450 on. And so obviously the $7 one is just, it's, you can get them just in a shape, or mine's kind of realistic, but I just bought a pair of boxers that have a special pocket for it, and I just stick it in the pocket, and then it just looks like I have junk when I walk around. And so that's one form of it. You can also get them as an STP, which is a stand to pee. You can get those both ranging in very basic. You've seen some like the Shiwi is out there, something similar to that, or you can get it like the one I have, where it is hand painted. It's got veins. It's it's very, very, very realistic, and I can actually attach it with a form of surgical glue and wear it for a few days. And so, of course, one of the funny things is obviously you got to be able to clean it. So the urethra is a little unrealistic, but it's there, and it allows me to go out in public and stand when I pee. I Bathroom anxiety is a huge thing. And it took me a long time to get comfortable with being able to just walk into the men's room. And then I was doing really, really good until one day, a guy who apparently listens way too much to how people pee found me out. And so since then, I got a lot more anxiety about it. I have a lot of dysphoria related to it now. So I got my prosthetic. And so that's something that I can use to be able to feel better and to kind of bring my mind off of the bottom dysphoria, especially in times that it's bad, just because they come on and they come off. And so that's what I use and what's available to us. You can also get them in strap-ons. So if that's something you're into, I mean, there's so many different kind of dicks and dick accessories you can get to help fight that. And then for top dysphoria, we have binders. There's a lot of information out there and a lot of misinformation about things that can be harmful. We do not encourage using ace bandages that can cause a lot of damage. And when you get a binder, you also want to get a very specific kind, because when you get kinds that latch and it only latches on one side, that can cause tissue damage. So you want to make sure that if it's zippered, it's either in the center or it's on both sides or down the back. You want to make sure that it fits correctly. You don't want to feel like you're getting crushed. A good fitting binder, like, you'll feel a little tight, but you should be able to move and breathe normally in it. And they also come in a range of prices. So you can get really cheap ones that, trust me, it's awful. Or you can, the good mid-range ones is there's two companies that I really like to promote when it comes to binders. They're both owned by people in the community. And one is GC2B, which is probably one that most of you have heard of if you've ever looked into it. The other one is called Shapeshifters. I am a huge fan of Shapeshifters. They're currently closed because they're making masks full time, but they're usually who I go to. And I usually spend about $50 on a good binder, and they last me anywhere between 6 and 8 months. And I'm not nice to mine either, so they hold up really, really well, and they come in really cool designs. I get what's called the Snyder, and looks like snake scales. Mm-hmm. And so you can get them in colors, you can get them in solids, you can get them in full tanks. So there's a full tank, a half tank, and like a crop, like more like a sports bra style, that are the different types of binders that you can get. And sometimes it's funny because if you get a full tank, it kind of feels like a dress. A very, very tight dress because they're long. And so that's something that can help with the top dysphoria. There is something out there called trans tape. I do urge caution with that one, just because if done incorrectly, it can cause damage. But that one is also owned by trans people. And yes, those are like the two methods of binding for your top. Some people are good with just wearing a sports bra and then a tank top that are smaller, that are able to do that. But that wouldn't work for me. What other devices do we have as transmasculine?
I don't know. I'm probably a bit rubbish on this. Yeah, strap-ons I could tell you a bit about, but other than that, not a lot. I tried a binder. I bought one and I wore it, I think, for about, I don't know, 2 minutes, and I just had to take it off. I have sensory issues, so any clothes that are tight or I'm aware of them, I just completely freak out, so I took it off. But
I have problems with texture. It's one of the reasons why it's so hard for me to get desks or beds or get new phone cases is if it doesn't feel good in my hand, I can't handle it. It brings me a lot of anxiety and can shut me down for a little bit. So I'm very, very big on textures. And the first binder I got was Underworks, and I could not do the texture. And so when I found Shapeshifters and ordered the first one, I was worried about it, but the material they use, it's very pleasant, kind of silky. And so my Shapeshifters binder, so I got that about 8 months into transition. When I got that changed the whole game of binding for me. Before, I just I wore a bra and just kind of dealt with it because I just couldn't do the other binders I had. And I wore the Shapeshifters one for the first time, and it changed the entire game for me. So it didn't hurt to move around in. It flattened me really, really well for how large I am. And it felt good on me. It didn't overheat me. So I just got like the half tank. And so it was definitely one. That's the big reason why I really, really, really push Shapeshifters as someone that is not neurotypical with sensory issues. They really worked with like my sensory on that. So that's why I like them. But GC2B is also one of the more well-known ones. And I actually just got 2 of their binders in today. I ordered from them because Shapeshifters was closed, and my binders they're struggling. So, they're hanging on by threads, literally, but...
Let's do about a minute of funny names for body parts.
Oh, like deuterus?
Deuterus!
That's what I call mine. The deuterus, and I hate it. We regularly try to kill each other.
Shark Week. Chesticles.
Chesticles is one of... I call them my fun bags. Or moobs, but...
Moobs.
Moobs is such a weird word. Moobs is like moist to me. I just...
No, thank you.
Thanks, I'm good. I call my little guy my micro penis. Because fun fact, that's technically what it is now. But...
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that, and people saying that, and I have seen some images of those, and it's I find it fascinating. I'm like, wow, it does that. It does that when you give it the right hormone.
Yeah, if my family is listening, plug your ears so you don't have to listen to this. But yeah, I actually had a huge euphoric discovery the other day. I was laying in bed, and I felt like a little horny, but I didn't feel like like the first 8 months of testosterone where I was horny all of the time and felt like I was dying. But it was enough that I was like, I got to do something about it. And so I kind of roll over, and I've got like a good beer belly going on, so I can't see anything down there. And so I get all set up, and then I touched it, and I was like, something's wrong. Like it doesn't feel the way it's supposed to feel. So I jump out of bed and I go look in the mirror, and I had the biggest boner. And I was so proud because I was just like, look at it, like you can see that. And it was and I was like, I wonder how many of my friends want to hear about my dick, like my actual dick.
That's amazing.
And it was like a huge moment for me because I was like, this is a huge milestone in my transition because the specific surgery I want is very dependent on the size of that. So knowing that I can get that big, I'm like, oh, this is good. This is good. This is exactly what I want. And then maybe one day I'll find a sugar daddy with $80,000 that'll get me what I want.
Amazing. How many blowjobs does it take for him to buy you a dick?
I'm willing to find out.
Oh my god, that's amazing. Oh, brilliant. Oh, it's so funny. I've got to tell you a story, completely unrelated. One of my oldest friends, I won't name her, but she knows who. She'll hear this and she'll know that I'm talking about her. She is really, really intelligent. She did forensic science. Forensic science at university. So, and she's got her degree and everything. She really knows her stuff. She's from a very matriarchal, very intelligent, very well educated, working class family. And she rang me up on the phone. It was a good, 4 years ago now. And she rang me up on the phone and she was really upset. And I was like, mate, what's happened? Are you okay? And she was like, nobody told me. And I was like, what's wrong with you? And she's like, my boyfriend was shagging me from behind. And he told me that he made a comment about the fact that he could see my bum hole. And I was like, yeah. She's like, I didn't know people can see your bum hole. And I was like, why wouldn't? I was like, it's an inch from your fanny. Like, why wouldn't he be able to see your butthole? And she was like, I thought that your butt cheeks covered your butthole, and I can't believe that for all of these years that I've been having sex, I didn't realise everyone can see my bumhole. I was like, you did forensic science. How could you not know that when you bend over, people can see your bumhole? And she's like, I'm so devastated and disturbed and destroyed by this. And I was like, this is the best thing that's ever happened. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Transection podcast. Join us next time for Dick stories and other shenanigans. If you have any questions or any comments or anything that you would like to say to us, you can tweet us at TransectionP. You can also contact us on Instagram at Transection Podcast or on Facebook at the Transection Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. And as I mentioned on an earlier episode, if we can help you with anything in particular, we'd be happy to workshop some ideas for you or give you some feedback. So get in touch. Thanks for joining us this time, and we will see you next time on another amazing and fantastic episode of the Transection Podcast. Goodbye from me.
And don't forget to sign up for our email list if you haven't at www.mixparishill.com/transection. So until next time, see you later.